What should you automate and what should you not? It's next on Zack Miller Says with our guest, Michael Devellano. Hopefully I said that right. We'll just have to wait till the very end to see if I pronounced it right, but I think I did. He is the man behind Cloud Advisory.io. And without further ado, you don't want to hear me, you want to hear him. Let's go. 3, 2, 1, boom. You're listening to Zack Miller Says. So the Japanese culture is something that you have some knowledge in and something that you've gotten into. How did you first kind of learn about that culture or get interested in something like that, even though, you live in Newport Beach, California?
Well, I mean, I'm Canadian, so I've been around.
There you go.
I escaped the maple curtain, but I don't know. I mean, I kind of look at all cultures and there's something appealing about most of them. And Japanese culture is pretty rich and interesting. So it's not that I'm an expert in it or anything, but there's that one concept of a keiretsu that I was kind of referencing you before, where I've been really thinking about this, that there's parts of this that could be modernized and applied to smaller startup companies to help them scale together. So that's kind of the idea that I was kind of bouncing around.
And the word keiretsu, what does that mean at its core?
It's a conglomerate. So it's a conglomerate of cooperative businesses. So the idea is that there's some common characteristics. Usually there's a bank at the core of them that has patient capital. So it's like they all typically own a bank. So there's some means of finance. There's cooperation around management, engineering, or technical expertise. And sometimes there's common customer. In a horizontal keiretsu, it's like they operate independently, but they kind of help each other. Or in a vertical keiretsu, kind of like, I'll use an example of Toyota. It's like, here's the parent company, and then there's all these distributors, manufacturers of pieces, and then they help everybody, right? There's some negative aspects of it because those are large companies. But when you look at the model, what really kind of started, I think, intriguing me was like, well, if I look at Y Combinator, or if I look at even Google or Amazon, they're kind of practicing this stuff. And I think since 2001, in the startup world anyway, there was this acknowledgement that, there's lessons to be learned. And actually, there's the keiretsu Angel Network, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they have chapters all over the world where they're trying to help small companies in the similar. So I think there's a common philosophy there that is secretly at the core of a lot of really successful startups.
Do you think that it's because that there needs to be so many different pieces to the puzzle, and so the keiretsu model is there is a bunch of different puzzle pieces, if you will, and if we can put them together, we can have this pretty thing, and this pretty thing happens to be business? I mean, is that where we're getting at with the different pieces, if you will, or how do you kind of see that?
So, I mean, traditionally, there's a long history in Japanese business of these conglomerates, right? But if you look at smaller organizations, I think the common issues of most startups are obviously capital is always, something that you've got to think about. And two is expertise, so technical expertise. And if every founder or founder pairing is recreating technical expertise as opposed to learning from other people that have had similar problems, then that's expensive and time consuming. There's relationships, and I'll throw data in there as well. So it's like everybody's buying the same data and everyone's trying to sell, and the cost of acquisition gets higher and higher as opposed to how do you drive that to zero? So it's almost like if I introduce you to someone, you're further along in the sales cycle versus, if I start from scratch and try and take them through that buyer's journey. So in my head, the idea that I think this is what's going on, is why wouldn't you build a conglomerate of cooperative startups that the idea being they have complementary services or products they could buy from each other to augment. They have access to talent together because talent's really challenging for smaller companies to get access to, and maybe even on a fractional basis. They have common data, so everyone's not buying the data all the time over and over, and they share relationships. And I think what you put at the core of it is almost like an affiliate model where if I introduce you to someone and something happens, it's just automatically going to pay out so that there is common financial interest. And that's the other thing is there's usually shareholdings between these companies. So the model that I've been playing with is, you would participate in my Keiretsu Foundry. You would contribute 2 to 5% of your equity, and you would take a share back. And the 2 to 5% would be based upon what stage you're at. The other interesting thing is with the Keiretsu is think of Mitsubishi, giant conglomerate, right? The CEOs of Mitsubishi and all the presidents of all the companies would have something called lunch club once a week. So they would literally meet these super powerful presidents and CEOs every Friday for lunch club to share ideas and information, or they would bring in a speaker. So I think that's another commonality, right? If you look at, I'll go back to Y Combinator where they have like the weekly dinner, right? And it just creates a tight community of people that are trying to help each other get better while running their own business, but you're not like on an island to yourself. So that's why I keep thinking there's this model of how do you form your own Keiretsu? And I think it's, if you have a common organization, there's interconnected shareholdings, and then there's 4 things at the core: shared data, shared talent, shared technology, and then probably shared relationships or some sort of financial structure where if I introduce you to someone, then there's just a payout automatically. And I think you can eventually take that to the point where you go, that's automated. So you create an AI at the core of all these companies that goes, hey, Zack, you have these 3 relationships and I want to make introductions. Are you good with them? And you go, only these 2. And then that's the extent of your thing. So I envision where you like, it's not a big part of your day, but it's like you could share relationships where you've sold to 3 customers and 2 of them probably need what another member of your Keiretsu need, and this one needs another thing, right? So that's kind of the idea anyway.
It's very interesting. I find that at the core, I believe in a model like that, but there becomes these, I want to call them outliers, but I don't even know that they're outliers, but there's people who don't want to actually play the game of the genuine Keiretsu, right? There's the people that aren't really trying to build in the relationships in this kind of way. So how would someone, or how do you see this? How do you envision something like this so that the rotten apples, if you will, the financial advisors or the people who are on LinkedIn that just message you and are like, hey, I want to give you all this stuff. Like how do you pre-qualify that those people are going to be in it and that the right people are at the table, the right people are the right pieces in the puzzle, if you will?
So I will distinguish this by saying that my Keiretsu would only be startups with potential of 100 million to $1 billion. So that's kind of part of my model. You're coming into it with the pre-education, first of all, of here's our model. If you're in this, this is the obligation. And then there's a formal agreement for shareholding and how those relationships work. And then there's an actual practice manager whose job it is for all the companies to find those relationships until such time as we can automate it. So it's not that I want to take up any part of your day, Zack. It's that we're just in this together. And the only touch points to me would be, I think every 3 months, you should be in a different 4-person mastermind in the group. There should be regular, as I mentioned, kind of lunch club meetings of the founders that are, whether it's a dinner or it's a virtual meeting, depending on where the companies are. So that's really the only interconnected structure. And the idea being there'd also be a once a month kind of social. And the idea of the social is anybody can make a 1-minute pitch of, here's the problem I solve, person I serve, this is what I need. So that's very purposeful. So nobody's going to be in it that's going to be a financial advisor or an insurance person or someone from a giant company. Everyone has the same thing. We have probably a common customer, and we're just non-competitive service-wise, and maybe they buy from each other, right? So it's like, why would I hire, for example, let's say there was a startup in there that's a digital marketing concierge. Why would I go out and build that practice when I can just contract one of my Keiretsu? And because there's built-in trust there, right? There's a built-in formula for how everybody works together. So that's kind of the idea.
I think that's strong, and I appreciate the changing of the masterminds, if you will, every quarter, if you will, because I find that oftentimes the 4 or 5 people that you're surrounding yourself with, someone in there or multiple people in there are getting up to different levels, but oftentimes they're being pulled down to this other level, if you will, and not able to grow into what they could because they don't change that group. And I think that's very powerful. So I appreciate that you said that. So let's backtrack. So when did you get into software?
So I broke out on my own. I was, kind of working different things in 2010. Prior to that, I had been a lot in the wireless space and what is now called IoT, but then was like a hodgepodge, right? So we were doing crazy stuff in the wireless carrier world. Worked a little bit for BlackBerry in the early days.
BlackBerry, remember them?
Well, yeah, because I was there, but yeah. And really, I think what happened for me was, for example, BlackBerry never had a really good application story. It was really a very constrained model. And then when iPhone came out in the carrier space, that rocked the carrier space. And it was, so we went from stitching together Scotch tape and glue to make things like field service automation, monitoring remote devices, dispatch, all that stuff, which were these really disparate pieces, to suddenly you had this magic platform where you could build really simple applications. And I was like, I'm going to go out on my own and do that. So that's when I said, I'm out of here. And I just started building everyone's digital product. So their iPhone, Android apps, and then the resulting backend. So I just really started almost like an agency model.
Got it. How old are you?
46.
Okay. Growing up so I think now computer science and learning how to code and things like that are something that are in the K through 12 models. Growing up
Where?
So what?
Where?
They're not?
I don't think so.
Oh, where I live.
I think it's a disaster.
Oh, well, I was under the impression, I don't have kids. I was under the impression that they're trying to teach those things a lot more than. Okay.
Don't get me started on that, but unless you want to, but. I think that it's really underserved. I mean, I tried to do, when my daughter was in high school, this is a side note, my daughter was in high school. She's now, last year of college, right? So when she was in high school, I went to the principal and said, hey, there's this thing called an hour of code, and I'd like to do it for your school. Can you provide literally a room? And whoever wants to come can come. And his response was, there's no demand for computer science in our school. We tried it.
And that's only a few years ago. So what year is that?
It was like 5-6 years ago, maybe.
Okay. So I was under the impression that, and I don't have kids, and I was under the impression just from the headlines that I've seen that there is a bigger interest in that stuff, but maybe it's extracurricular stuff. I've seen stuff like Code Ninjas or this hour of code that you talked about.
It's side loading it. It's crazy because the reality is, so my response to that was, is there demand for calculus? Because no kid's going to come to you and say, I need to take calculus, but you're mandating it as a course at some level, right? Or algebra.
Well, not to mention that a lot of those things, nothing against a lot of the things that are taught, but those are things that, like, I consume a bunch of stupid knowledge, I would say, right? But a lot of the stuff that is very book smart, I didn't retain because I didn't care, right? And when I need to know when the War of 1812 is, I would just Google when is the War of 1812, right? I don't need to. I don't need.
Canada won, but
it was in 1812, I think, right? But my point is like, why learn those things instead of just learning the things that you want to? I think that's kind of an interesting thing. So I was under the impression that more code was being taught. I guess I was wrong.
I don't think that. I think the focus is like on stuff that's, not career oriented. It's almost like it's a dirty thing.
Interesting. So then
STEM programs, right? But it's like you have to be special and you have to get into it. And it's limited.
I see. So then how do you, knowing that the future seems to be still STEM and computer science and engineering and computer background, whatever keyword that you want me to, buzzword you want me to use around that kind of word, how did you get interested in that? And then how do you see that people that are younger than us can learn about that, get into it, not on the sidebar, but actually, as something as early as possible?
Yeah, it's a great dilemma, I think, because I think that public education is this monopoly and it's a great barrier of time. It chews up a lot of time for people that, trying to delay their growth. That's the way I look at it. If you're 12 or 10 or 13 or 15, you can do that stuff. And it doesn't have to all be everybody doing science and, but I don't think there's any specialization early enough to, you kind of hit it on the head. It's like, well, I'm interested in this. I should be studying this, right? I think there's so many, here's my big block of requirements. And why don't you go to a computer lab after school? And by the way, it's in the basement. That doesn't help anybody. So I
Well,
think
and growing up, people who did do computer things, were nerds, called four eyes, were bullied, and that's a completely different world now.
sure. I mean, I compare that to my compatriots in China or Russia, and they pump out really good developers, and it's part of their mandate, right? Like they have cities that are around tech, like so. There's that flip side. So I think it's like we need to do a way better job of either fixing public education or releasing you from the bounds of it.
Well, in public education, ultimately, I think some people could say is just daycare.
Well, that's terrible, right? Like, but you're right. Like I think they are learning, but what are they learning and why, right? To me, I'd rather see a kid that's interested in, oh, I'm really jazzed about robotics, or I'm really jazzed about apps. Yeah, there you go. Do it, right?
It's
Resources to do it.
It's so interesting because I hated going to school every day. I basically was on the bottom quarter of grades. But when I found something that I enjoyed, I did well in that, which is interesting. And then now I feel like I'm doing triple the amount of education, learning on YouTube University as much as possible. That's not a real thing. It's just YouTube with the word university in it for people who are listening. But it's I get to consume the things that I want and learn from it, from people that I can search from, and I think that's a valuable thing. People can listen to you and I, and be like, oh, look, I like what Michael and Zack are saying about learning. How can I take this thing that I learned about, that I like, computer science, coding, Internet of Things, Blackberries, what is that, right? And then do some stuff on the internet, find that out, and then learn about it. That's a very valuable thing. Like, it's almost like we should be teaching people how to internet.
Well, so you kind of hit on a lot of really high, interesting points. One is we have almost unlimited access to information and ideas. It's out there. Now, you compare that to a very structured, old school, sit your butt here and pay attention model that's taking out physical activity. And there's lots of political agendas in public schools. And they have none of this has to do with anything that's going on in the world, as far as I can tell. Now, that's probably an extreme view. And it's a union monopoly. Like unions have a monopoly on public education. And I don't think that's a spot for innovation. So the flip side to that is self-guided. Now, obviously, when the person's younger, there needs to be a structure to guide them and give a foundation. But if you're a public school where you're trying to stick someone in a seat, you're taking away physical aspects, particularly for boys, you're making them go to school too early, and then you're competing against an iPad with YouTube. And then you go, you can't pay attention. No. I learn faster than you're teaching me. So I think that what you see is that model is broken. And I don't know how you fix it. So if on an individual basis, I think you've almost got to say, how do I extract my kids from this? And how do I do it on my own? How do I form my own schools with 20, 30 other people that are like-minded with these outcomes? And yeah, we'll meet whatever standard because there's a homeschooling model in my area, right? And I think that the de-emphasizing this, feeder system to universities is probably important because that's accreditation. And I think companies have to get involved because I think internships are really, really important. I think apprenticeships are really important. Like, why do we do apprenticeships in plumbing but not in computer science? Why do we do apprenticeships in electrical but not in design and creative fields, right? And then stamp it. And I think that is got to be a trend that starts emerging. And I think there's got to be a common platform. Like I have a friend who runs a company called Scrimmage, and they're an iPad-based learning management system. Because a lot of the LMSs that are out there are a disaster too, right? So it's like, well, let's create something that has AI that figures out, Zack, you have interest, but also aptitude for this. Here's what you should be studying, and here's how to prove that you learned it.
Interesting. So I love the word apprentice because uh, I think the word intern, I think about coffee, right? Oh, this person gonna learn how to make coffee. Like, that's what an internship is, right? And so when I went to college, so I have this theory that, and yes, I'm a white male who went to college, has a 4-year degree, so whatever. But going to school, at that 18 to 23-year-old range, people should go for 2.5 years. It should be at least 50 miles away from your family so that you can learn how to do those things. And you should immerse yourself into the industries and topics that you think you want to go into. Because I have a journalism degree, and while I interview people here for a living, I'm not doing the traditional, go working for the media thing. Had I believe, gone through an internship, apprenticeship while in school, I think I would have changed my mind on that and realized that traditional news wasn't what I wanted to go into. It took me finishing school, the 6 figures in debt, whatever, and then getting that job for a few years, realizing that when all I really needed to do was be there for 2 weeks and realize knocking on someone's door, finding out that their husband was murdered is not necessarily the greatest thing in the world. And I don't mean to laugh at that, but like I love the word apprenticeship because I think you can, the people that can really kind of coach and lead in that kind of way can really help, I'll use another word, mentor those individuals into a career that can be very valuable. And so I love that, whether that's a physical person, an app, a school online, an iPad, whatever it might be, I think that can be extremely valuable.
Imagine this. Instead of going to a traditional high school, you're 14, right? You're not stupid. Like, people underestimate what 13 and 14, between 13 and 14 is a big jump, and 14 and 15 is another big jump, and 15 to 16, another huge jump, right? In a lot of ways, physical, emotional, mental. So what if instead of sitting there and taking 6 courses or 5 courses every semester, or however your school's structured, learning to take tests so that you can get into another 4 years somewhere that's going to basically steal your future earnings with debt, what if every year you had an apprenticeship and a project, and along the way, and you had to work for a certain size of company, you can choose the industry, you can choose the role, and it has to be really spelt out. And at the end of that, you've got basically a project essay presentation that is on what you learned during that time. So, or part of it, you could start your own thing. So you, Zach, have a choice. You can either do an apprenticeship, or you can be mentored in starting your own thing. And at the end of 4 years, you have 4 of those. Which one's better?
Right. So let's talk a little bit about Shop and You. So you got.
Sorry, I went off a tangent.
No. So you got Cloud Advisory
Before we go into me, this is what you said something about where you disparaged yourself based upon your whatever. Oh yeah, I know I can't speak. Bullshit. First of all, and second of all, I want to point out something also that's corrupt about universities. Right now, universities are 60-40 women. People can pretend it's not, but if you go look at the stats, you can look those up. The enrollment in post-secondary education in the United States and Canada is 60-40 and growing. So the question is, where are all the guys?
Where?
Well, I believe there's another path, and they are taking it. And this goes to what we're talking about. And I think a lot of the guys are very practical, right? If it's a hostile environment, I'm not learning anything, and you want me to pay for that, a lot of them are going to opt out. And where they're opting out to, there's a huge portion, they're going playing video games. So you're familiar with Twitch?
Of course.
So Twitch has done a brilliant thing. Number one, it's owned by Amazon. Number two, esports is the second largest audience in the United States out of all sports, only behind the NFL. So there's 132 million fans or viewers of the NFL. There's 105 million of esports. It's ahead of baseball. It's ahead of basketball. It's ahead of hockey. It's ahead of soccer. Now, if you look at that model, what are they doing? There's players and there's a way for them to monetize them playing and people watching them. And some guy might be getting $100 a month, and some guy might be getting 10 million a month, right? And there's teams, but that is a massive ecosystem, and it's about 90%, maybe 95% male. So I think this is an example where they're like, oh, guys are smart enough to know I'm just going to go do this. Like, why would I not want to do this thing? And I think you're going to see that increasingly where people are like rejecting that path, and society doesn't even understand that's happened. The last 5 years have been crazy.
It's interesting too, because I constantly look at things in a bell curve, right? So you got quadrant 1, which is like your champions. Quadrant 4 is like the Taylor Swift of the world haters, right? And then, you know, somewhere in the middle is, you know, the 2s and the 3, quadrant 2 and 3, where 2 is like, we could be, you know, leaned this way if we were persuaded. And then quadrant 3 is like, well, somewhere in there we're going to do it, right? There's still people who aren't on Facebook, which is an interesting thing, right? But there's how many people, what's interesting is you got your 105 million Twitchers, right? Which roughly is the number you're saying, right?
In just the US.
In just the US. And so you hear that, and then you hear over here in quadrant 4, you're like, that's stupid. To me, it's like, shut up. Like, this is not about you. This is like, there. Even if it's 1 versus 4, right? Even if it's 1 person versus 10 people over here, you still have something in quadrant 1, right? And so it's just like, just because you, person in quadrant 4, doesn't like it, just because you, the hater of the world, don't like what's going on in 1, doesn't mean that thing doesn't have merit and can't be something valuable and bigger. And I think that we get into that world a lot. And so it's interesting that data is actually growing. And almost defeating the largest media outlet in the world, or the largest sport thing in the NFL, and they will, right?
It's over.
But it's
like wide. It's over. Worldwide is crazy. The numbers are crazier, right? But anyways.
But you said something that I thought was interesting, where from a political standpoint, or the monopoly, right? And so if you look at the NFL as a monopoly and this other thing that isn't, it's kind of like the indies, if you will, right? So how does the indie world start getting some of that NFL money, if you will? Because really that's, but at a mass level that people aren't seeing. So
they are. That's what's crazy. Like, this is why it's hilarious that,
I mean, Amazon did buy them for what, 1.6 billion or something?
Which was a steal.
Right.
Which was nothing.
Which was many years ago too, because wasn't it like 2013, 2014, which is a very long time ago for that to be where it is.
If you look at sports owners, guys that own football teams or basketball, a lot of basketball actually. So a lot of basketball and guys that have arenas, they're building esports stadiums. So that's like just a reality. And there's, you know, they're not stupid. They see it, right?
Well, and do you watch the show Ballers, or did you watch the show Ballers?
I've seen it. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's this year they brought into it. Maybe it was even last season. The show is now over. The Rock, obviously, you know, had to get the plug in for The Rock, you know, the greatest human being ever made. I didn't just buy a picture of him. A audience listener bought that for me after I mentioned him, and I was like, I guess I'll put that up. But whatever. They actually get into esports into Ballers. Right? Which is interesting. And so they have these NFL players who are like, why would I crush my brain by getting hit when I can just play this game, smoke weed, and be like, whatever?
That's the thing. But I think what's hilarious about it is it's not 20 guys. It's not 20 people. It's huge. It's the biggest, right? So this thing is happening. People are arguing about this thing, which is the high school to university path. And is this the right thing? And guys are already saying, I already know what the right thing is. I'm going to go start a Twitch channel and play video games. And if I get $2,000 a month with that, I'm happy. Or maybe I can get it to 4, you know, it's like.
So do you think, okay, so then this is interesting. So do you believe that the way that the gig economy, the Ubers of the world, the Postmates of the world, where someone goes and does this thing as a side job, do you believe that people can start creating that kind of additional revenue side jobs, and that the old gig economy is now really Twitch and people playing games and creating streaming networks?
I mean, I don't think it's, I mean, yes, but I don't think that it's one or the other, right? I think it's like, this is all part of an ecosystem that's reality. The number of freelancers versus employees will cross in by 2030, maybe 2025. And that's not slowing down, despite what California is trying to do, and with Assembly Bill 5, which is a disaster. Even you can see Uber and is already adapting to that. They sent out an email yesterday where they're trying to classify freelancers as employees. Which, why would you hire the person, right? They put this massive barrier in as of January 1. But to your point, there's all these other paths where you can just get income, do your own thing. So I can go make stuff and put it on Etsy because I'm creative, and I can, post my prints on Instagram and people are going to buy them digitally. I don't have to go to art school, or maybe I'm going to art school and I'm paying for it doing that, right? There's so many more paths now. It's a pretty awesome time. I can drive Uber whenever I feel like, while I'm playing video games at night, and maybe I'm getting $500 there and I'm getting $2 or $3 grand there, and it's paying for my car. Right. So I think people are making those decisions.
Well, in a lot of places, with just the numbers that you said, $30,000 to $50,000 a year is a lot of median incomes for people. So, and they're doing that on things that they enjoy more. So,
and that's what should be happening, right? And there's always going to be those people that groan and feel the pain and try to live in the past. But that's just, these are all great things. These are things that should be happening and should happen. And I think the next 10 years is going to be way more like, do you think about these things are all really within the last 10, 12 years? The next 10 years are going to be another level.
Yeah, it's going to be it's going to be very interesting to see.
I'm pretty excited.
I heard recently that this bad boy, the cell phone, is going away to some other kind of tech, which will be interesting. Who knows where that is? So, okay, so cloudadvisory.io. So, that is your business that you started to solve what problem?
So I work with founders and entrepreneurs, typically companies between 1 and 25 million, to help develop digital products and automate marketing, sales, and support.
Through some sort of software, typically?
Yeah. So what I wrote about in my book, which is also called Automate and Grow, is really a formula that says, look, here's these transformational exponential technologies that are happening. Your job as an entrepreneur is to figure out which one of these applies to my business and my industry, so that I can build digital products that scale, or hybrid products, and then have a plan to automate marketing, sales, and support, and then build or adapt the technology around it.
So what should
just buying technology to solve a pain point, right?
What should someone automate and what shouldn't they?
It's a great question. So there's a model where I kind of write about every 90 days as an entrepreneur, you want to create 3 buckets of things. So there's stuff that you're doing every day that is annoying to you. And those are candidates for either being eliminated or automated. And then there's a bucket of stuff that's repetitive but important. And those things should be automated. And you automate them either by delegating, creating or buying some piece of software or a process, or a combination of the 3. And then the third category is the stuff that inspires you. And that's where, as the entrepreneur, you should be focused your time on as much as humanly possible, and you free it up by every 90 days going through that little exercise.
That was great. I mean, that was great. I mean, I've never thought of it that way, but
I stole it.
You stole it?
Yeah, I stole it from Dan Sullivan.
Well, thank you, Dan Sullivan.
Thank you, Dan Sullivan.
So in a video that I was watching on cloudadvisory.io, I heard that you mentioned Salesforce experts. I'm Michael with Salesforce experts, but I'm on the cloudadvisory.io landing page, if you will. So is it 2 different brands? Where's the synergy between those two? Why have one, not the other?
I have to decide how that fits in, but essentially, this is the way I look at it. So we talk about, Salesforce is a platform that you can use to automate marketing, sales, support.
So Salesforce, the actual big juggernaut business Salesforce, or like you having a Salesforce.
No, Salesforce, the technology platform, which is owned by Salesforce, the company.
Yep.
So a lot of people don't know what that is, but the core of it is the customer. So CRM, customer relationship management in the cloud. But then they have marketing automation with Pardot and Marketing Cloud, and they have Service Cloud to deal with post sales. And then there's a development story. The point of that really is there's different sizes of companies adopting different pieces of that. And I think there's 3 levels of engagement with a partner. The biggest level is a full-on consulting customization. It's a lot of time and money. Then there's like post engagement. And then there's smaller companies that do that, but all they need is a bucket of hours and tasks. So the third that I noticed hasn't been served is more of this developers subscription model. So the way I look at it is you're going to either have a quick start package with a bundle of hours and tasks, or a custom statement of work for a much bigger engagement where you're taking that technology, customizing it to your business so that you're ready to scale and grow. And then post that, there's a category of smaller to mid-size and maybe even big that all they need is to be able to submit tasks and get them done, and they'll pay a fixed fee for that. And that's kind of the developer as a service model, where it's not like I don't have to hire Zack and have him on the payroll. It's a help desk. I submit it. There's an SLA, and my stuff gets done. And that's really the difference. So Salesforce Experts is really a third level of service, and it's really post-engagement, I think.
You got into apps in 2010, is that what you said? And that's probably when there was less than 50,000 apps in the app stores at that point. There was probably only one iPhone. There was only one iPhone screen at that point, probably.
Yeah, iPad came out in April 2010.
Right. And so that became the second screen, which a lot of them were just the 2X. I remember that, where it went through, and that's when apps were easy. So do you think that apps in the traditional way, like basically B2C, is that world still growing? Is it over? As an expert in that, where do you see that world going?
It's a good question. It's still really important. I think that apps need to be more purposeful. So it needs to play into how you're reaching a customer, and it's got to be a channel. So it's tough to not have an app. And I think people mess up those projects a lot because they don't have a framework to think about what I should be building and what that's going to bring up afterwards, and to validate that before they build. Where I see that going is you kind of mentioned that the device itself going away. I see apps becoming independent of devices, and there'll be different interfaces to that. And examples of that would be skills on Alexa or Google skills. And you're already seeing that happen. So that, yes, I've built a platform, and an app is an interface to that platform for you, Zack, to use, let's call it Uber. But I can also say to Alexa, call me an Uber. And it will do that. And the underlying stuff there is the same, right? But it's an app that's independent of a device. And that's going to increasingly happen. And that's what I'm seeing the future of. Another example that I would say is chatbots. So I can have a conversation with a bot, whether it's by text or in Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. The underlying piece is that same core that an app is accessing. But in the chat, I can say, hey, can you send me an Uber? And it'll say, yeah, where are you going? And I tell it, okay, here's your rate. Do you want to do it now? Yes. Okay, you'll be there in 15 minutes. I think that is another example of a device independent, app independent, what's an app that's device independent, really.
So the world of voice is interesting because if you think about it, radio was big 30 years ago for many years. Then we got into TV getting bigger, and then obviously cable, and then the internet, and then streaming, and then now we're going back to something that is radio focused, if you will, right? So it's audio focused. Is that backtracking though? It's hard for. I believe in audio, obviously, because audio is easier to do multiple things at once. Mm-hmm. Right? Where if we're doing video and something else, you have to be putting more attention towards that, audio and visual towards that. But it's hard for me to envision voice only being the next practical step that is a growing step and not a backtrack. So how do you see...
How do you interact with the radio?
I touched a button.
but you had absolutely no say in anything other than what was programmed. So I think voice is just an interface,
Mm-hmm.
but what we're doing is we're accessing the same capability that apps gave us, which is to be the boss of what's happening. And it'll give you a service or a feature set. It's just a different way to interface with it. It's a more natural one. Like, why are we still using QWERTY keyboards? It makes
So
no sense.
is this just the next step in technology? Then we'll see video after that, and then another layer on top of that, and that this is just the easiest thing from a technology standpoint. Is that
And
is
again,
that
I don't think it's like mutually exclusive, you know? Like, I think if you look at the devices that are coming out, they're not just audio. So yes, I have like, Alexa, tell Samuel to set a timer for 4 minutes. Doesn't like it.
4 minutes. Starting now.
Samuel L. Jackson just set a timer for me.
Oh,
Right?
I'm
So
sick and tired of these snakes.
snakes on a plane.
Yeah, it's a little more PG on this one.
Well, he does swear on this too. It's funny, but
Love it.
I think there's okay. Well, then you look at the next devices though; they do have screens. It's just not in your pocket.
So then how and another thing that I thought is interesting about voice, and again, I believe that voice is that next thing.
It's
It's
one
one
of
of the things. But like at least I get to self-filter when I'm looking at something. So if I look up your name or my name on Google, I get to sift through and then choose one. On voice, where is that?
It's the same. You know, I think the innovation. My point is, radio is programmed and it's a one-way interface unless you're picking up a telephone.
But
calling
I'm
in.
still scrolling through, figuring out until I find the thing that I want, which is the same thing.
It's very programmed, right? Whereas the power of the app was I can search for anything. Well, there's no difference between searching by typing and searching by voice, and that's going to increasingly converge. And video is a natural layer of that because I'm going to be wanting. Maybe I want to look at somebody, right? Maybe I want to have a call that way because the phone I think is just dying and dying, right? Just because of this arcane. Well, I got 9 digits or whatever it is, right? So I just think it's a natural new interface. I think bots are similar because we're very comfortable with texting and short messaging and conversations. And I think increasingly conversations, whether that's by voice or text, will be the interface with the software.
Okay.
And it's not exclusive. Like, you'll still have apps, right? I think like that's just reality. But it's going to be, I could be out in public and it authenticates me.
No, and I think the way that you've explained that has made me understand a little bit better. And I try to stay up on these things, and so it was always me just thinking like, okay, like it does seem like we're kind of backtracking in a way, but the way that you explain that, it makes it a little bit easier. So thank you for that. What's something about you that most people don't know about?
I'm a hockey scout.
A hockey scout. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you are Canadian, so I would that.
Shock, right?
Big shock.
So I've coached at different levels. I was a director of coaching for an organization up in Everett, Washington. I lived up in Seattle for a long time. And then the next evolution of that, I'm the U.S. scout for a major junior hockey team.
Very cool. What? So who is your hockey team?
Everett Silvertips, ranked third or fourth in the country in the Canadian Hockey League. So the Canadian Hockey League is the highest level of 16 to 20-year-old hockey players in the world. Our guys get drafted into the NHL. It's an alternative path to NCAA because NCAA's got, typical, they try to delay guys until they're older because that tends to be older. And they say, oh, you guys are professional between 16 and 20 if you play major or junior. So they say, you got to choose, but you got to sit around for 4 years and do nothing. Well, not nothing, but. So our guys, like, for example, our former goalie Carter Hart plays for the Philadelphia Flyers. Last year we had 2 of our players drafted to the NHL, Dustin Wolf to Calgary and Gianni Fairbrother to Montreal. So there's 3 leagues there. It's the Canadian Hockey League, but there's also U.S. teams in each of the 3 leagues. So it's the Western, Ontario, and Quebec League. And we're in the Western League with Portland, Seattle, Spokane, and Tri-City.
I love the parallels between sports and business.
Alexis, Samuel just set my alarm.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Sam. Appreciate you, Sam. I love the parallels between sports and business because I think that there's just a lot of synergies. From a leadership perspective, or from something that you've done while kind of helping mentor and grow these younger athletes, what's something that you've learned or taken from there and then used in your business career?
I'm probably better at it in hockey than I am in my business career. I think in hockey, I try not to underestimate them, and I try to make sure that I'm pushing them in a productive way to be their best individual self while still working together. So hockey is a really interesting sport where you cannot have one or two stars and win. You need everybody to be on the same page. And if you listen to the way hockey players talk, people make fun of it because they're always talking about the same team things. So I think I've done a better job of that in hockey than I have in maybe business, but that's the big lesson for me, which is I'm always trying to, I've probably done it in business too, but I think give people, understand who they are, have a good relationship with them communication wise, encourage them to do that thing that they're really good at while still meeting what I need them to do and giving them a framework to do that.
And you know what's interesting about hockey, and I'm just thinking of the four major sports. So between football, baseball, basketball, and hockey, hockey is the one that you have the most lines on that are active in a game on a very regular basis, right? And so that team really does matter. Not that teams don't matter in those other ways, but like the skill player really is multiple lines on a team. So I can see that being extremely valuable. What's something that you want to do in life that you haven't done yet?
Win a Stanley Cup.
You personally. So you have to be a part of a team to do that?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously not as a player, but, I would want to
be the oldest.
Yeah, that would not happen. Even if I was young, I would not be able to compete at that level when you understand the level of those guys. But, whether that's a scout or a manager or something in that role, one day, like I want to be part of that.
That's very cool. Sure. The book that you put together, Automate and Grow, is the name?
Yes, exactly.
What was something while writing that you thought was going to be super easy that actually ended up becoming really difficult?
So my process, and there's a video out there somewhere on what I did. I wrote my book in 45 days. I had a really methodical process where my goal was to write for 30 days, 5 pages a day. That was really, really hard, believe it or not. Not that easy. So I just, I went brute force through it. And I think the toughest thing afterwards was editing it and going back and reading what you had written and cleaning it up and fixing it over and over and over. And I think it still honestly needs, like it went through a whole bunch of rounds, but I could still see where it goes through one more series even.
It's interesting that you said that about in 45 days. I believe John Grisham wrote one of his first book where he wanted to write a page a day, and it took him 3 years to do it. Wow. And that book didn't get picked up, but then he kept writing and writing and writing. And obviously John Grisham is who he is now. As someone who also wrote a book, I would tend to agree that the editing process is the most difficult. So like getting it out was actually fairly easy. And people are like, really? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, if you know what you want to say, it's fairly easy to get out. But then to have to reread that thing for the 16th and 17th time, you're like, you miss so much because you know in your mind what you think you wrote.
Yeah,
but then exactly. It's very difficult to actually read that and not understand. Even when I was voicing, because I did the voice for my book, I started reading what I thought I was saying. And then I would read and be like, oh, that's not what I said. So like,
it's so painful.
It's very hard and people don't get it. And so it's like, you get to like, I think I finished my book 18 months ago. And I have not read it in its physical form since, other than that one time I read it from the audio perspective, because it's just, I've read it so many times, it's hard. So I get your pain in that.
It's like when you hear actors say, I don't watch my movies. There's a reason. It gets tough,
They are making movies quicker though now, so.
Oh yeah, that's true. But I think as an actor, like a lot of them don't watch themselves because you're constantly like, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. At least with a book, you can go back and fix it. You can come up, clean it up. But that process is a little mentally, that's the toughest thing, I think.
I do find that personally rewatching stuff though, other than the book. I love to rewatch stuff because I can learn from that. And so I try to do a lot of detailed notes on saying, hey, this is how I could learn from that. And it's made me stronger. If someone wanted to learn more about you or to find you online, where's the best place to find that?
They can go to automategrow.biz, and the podcast is /podcast. You can find Automate and Grow on Amazon, of course. Cloudadvisory.io if you're looking for help from a technology or a marketing technology leadership point of view, or just someone that can help you fill in the gaps of, talent and resources. That's probably cloudadvisory.io, and that's the work I do there.
And how often do people mispronounce your last name?
Probably a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so should we try it out then?
Well, we can try it. You want to try it?
Michael. Did I get that right?
That part's easy, but yeah.
Okay. Devellano.
See, okay, so this is what's funny is it's Italian, not Spanish.
Well, I got the first part right.
But L's are not right. Because it's not a Y sound, it's an L sound.
So what is it?
Devellano.
Devellano. Yeah. There it is. Michael Devellano.
Thank you.
Awesome. Anything else that we've missed that you want to talk about?
No, I'm sorry if I went on tangents, but it was an exciting conversation. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you.
And I appreciate Samuel L. Jackson setting off that alarm within 4 minutes.
Thanks, Sam, for us. He's slow.
Gosh, he's working on. He's back into a Star Wars movie or something. So, Michael, I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to this ongoing relationship.